Every autumn across China, over 400 million people participate in an ancient harvest celebration that most Americans have never even heard of despite its enormous cultural and agricultural significance. They gather small reddish-brown fruits from ancient gnarled trees that have stood for generations, some for multiple centuries, producing fruit continuously the entire time. These remarkable fruits taste like a perfect combination of fresh apple, honeyed date, and caramel with a satisfyingly crisp texture when eaten fresh, and a rich concentrated sweetness when dried naturally in autumn sun. Children eat them as healthy candy that parents happily provide. Elders brew them into medicinal teas that have supported health for millennia. Families cook them into traditional soups, nourishing porridges, and elaborate festival desserts that have been prepared using the same beloved recipes for over 4,000 years of continuous cultivation. The hardy trees that produce this beloved fruit require almost nothing from the people who tend them. They survive brutal summer temperatures, exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, without any irrigation whatsoever. They endure harsh winter freezes, dropping to 28 degrees below zero without any protection or winter preparation. They grow equally well in sandy desert soil, heavy clay, rocky mountainsides, alkaline flats, and essentially everything in between. They produce abundant fruit harvests reliably for 100 years or significantly more without replanting, replacement, or major intervention. This remarkable fruit tree has virtually no pest problems anywhere it grows throughout its extensive native range. The insects, fungi, bacteria, and diseases that devastate American orchards and require billions of dollars in annual pesticide applications simply do not affect this extraordinarily resilient species. A farmer can plant jujube trees and essentially walk away, returning only to harvest fruit, year after year, for the rest of their entire life and the lives of their children and grandchildren after them. The fruit is called jujube, sometimes marketed in Western countries as Chinese date, though it is actually not related to true date palms whatsoever. The tree grows wild across Asia, from China westward, through India, throughout the Middle East, and into southern Europe. It has been cultivated deliberately longer than almost any other fruit tree still grown anywhere on Earth today. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites confirms jujube cultivation in China dating back over 4,000 years to the earliest recorded dynasties. The United States Department of Agriculture officially introduced jujube to America in 1908. Government plant explorers brought back carefully selected varieties from China specifically because the fruit's extraordinary qualities seemed perfect for the harsh conditions of the American Southwest. USDA researchers documented the tree's remarkable drought tolerance, pest resistance, and fruit quality in detailed reports, recommending widespread cultivation. Then something curious happened that is repeated with every superior food plant that threatens commercial agriculture's business model. The jujube simply disappeared from American awareness, despite its obvious advantages and official government endorsement. This is the story of the jujube tree, the fruit sweeter than dates that survives conditions that would kill any commercial orchard, and the agricultural industry that ensured you would never learn this tree exists. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's begin. The Botany of jujube reveals why this tree thrives in conditions that destroy conventional fruit production. Jujube trees develop extraordinarily deep root systems that access water far below the reach of shallow-rooted commercial fruit trees. A mature jujube sends roots 20 to 30 feet into the ground, tapping moisture reserves that persist through droughts lasting months or even years. While almond orchards and apple trees wither without constant irrigation, jujube trees continue producing fruit from water sources that surface-dependent species can never reach. The leaves of jujube trees feature waxy coatings and small surface areas that minimize water loss through transpiration. These adaptations evolved across millions of years in semi-arid environments, where water scarcity was the norm rather than the exception. The tree essentially sips water while conventional fruit trees gulp it. A jujube orchard requires a tiny fraction of the irrigation that keeps California's almond industry alive. Cold tolerance in jujube matches or exceeds most fruit trees grown commercially in America. Depending on variety, jujube trees survive winter temperatures from -20 to -28 degrees Fahrenheit without damage. This hardiness range allows successful cultivation across most of the continental United States, from Maine to California, from Minnesota to Texas. The tree adapts to local conditions within a single generation. The pest and disease resistance of jujube remains its most remarkable characteristic from a commercial agriculture perspective. Almost no insects attack jujube trees in any significant way. Almost no fungal or bacterial diseases affect the species. Almost no chemical interventions are required to produce clean, marketable fruit. A jujube grower can completely ignore the spraying schedules that dominate commercial apple, peach, and cherry production. This near-total pest immunity results from biochemical compounds in jujube wood, leaves, and fruit that deter feeding and infection. The tree produces these protective compounds naturally without human intervention. Evolution refined these defenses across millions of years in environments where the tree survived without any agricultural support. The protection is built into jujube genetics in ways that breeding programs have never replicated in commercial fruit species. Fruit production begins just 2 to 3 years after planting and continues for a century or longer. A jujube tree planted by a young farmer will still be producing fruit when that farmer's grandchildren reach old age. The productive lifespan exceeds almost any investment horizon that agricultural finance typically considers. The tree just keeps giving regardless of economic conditions, market prices, or input costs. The history of jujube cultivation stretches back further than almost any fruit crop still grown today. Chinese archaeological sites dating to 7000 BCE contain jujube seeds indicating human consumption and likely cultivation. Written records from Chinese dynasties beginning around 2000 BCE describe jujube orchards, harvest festivals, and medicinal uses that continue essentially unchanged into the present day. The fruit appears in the earliest Chinese poetry, philosophy, and medical texts as an established part of civilized life. Traditional Chinese medicine assigned jujube extraordinary importance as both food and medicine. Practitioners prescribed dried jujube to calm anxiety, promote sleep, support digestion, and strengthen overall vitality. The fruit appeared in hundreds of traditional formulations, addressing conditions from simple fatigue to serious illness. Modern research has confirmed bioactive compounds in jujube that support these traditional applications. The Persian Empire cultivated jujube extensively along the Silk Road trade routes. Caravans carried dried jujube as travel food precisely because it provided concentrated nutrition that would not spoil across months of desert travel. The trees themselves spread westward along these routes, naturalizing across the Middle East and into the Mediterranean region, wherever conditions supported their drought-tolerant lifestyle. European colonizers encountered jujube in North Africa and the Mediterranean, but largely ignored it as a crop. Their agricultural systems focused on species they understood, rather than adopting unfamiliar plants regardless of merit. Jujube remained a curiosity rather than a crop throughout European expansion, despite growing wild in regions Europeans controlled for centuries. The United States Department of Agriculture took a different approach during the early 20th century. The agency commissioned plant explorers to search the world for species that might benefit American agriculture. These explorers traveled to remote regions, collected seeds and cuttings, and shipped promising material back to USDA research stations for evaluation. The program represented serious governmental investment in agricultural improvement. Frank Meyer's historic plant exploration expeditions brought jujube officially to American shores, along with hundreds of other valuable species. Meyer worked as a USDA plant explorer from 1905 until his mysterious death by drowning in 1918 during his fourth grueling expedition to China. He walked thousands of miles entirely alone across China, Mongolia, and Central Asia, collecting over 2,500 plant introductions that would eventually transform American agriculture and horticulture in ways that few people today recognize. Meyer lemons that bear his name, soybeans that now dominate American agriculture, ornamental flowering cherries that beautify Washington, D.C., disease-resistant grapes, improved wheat varieties, and dozens of other now common plants entered America solely through his dangerous solo expeditions, across regions where few Westerners had ever traveled. Meyer encountered extensive jujube cultivation throughout northern China and immediately recognized the tree's extraordinary potential for the American Southwest. The trees thrived in conditions remarkably similar to arid and semi-arid regions of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, where water scarcity limited agricultural options. The fruit quality exceeded most temperate fruits, familiar to Americans, in terms of sweetness and nutritional density. The complete pest resistance eliminated the spray programs that already burdened American orchards with significant costs. Everything about jujube seemed absolutely perfect for widespread American adoption in regions poorly suited to conventional fruit production. Meyer collected superior jujube varieties that had been carefully selected by Chinese farmers across many centuries of cultivation and shipped them back to USDA research stations. His detailed reports described the fruit's exceptional qualities, the tree's minimal cultural requirements, and its extraordinary adaptation to harsh environments where other fruit trees simply could not survive. He specifically recommended jujube for regions where chronic water scarcity severely limited conventional fruit production. His professional assessments could not have been clearer or more enthusiastic about the tree's potential value to American agriculture and American farmers. USDA researchers at stations in California, Texas, and other southwestern states confirmed Meyer's observations through years of careful trial. The trees established easily, produced quickly, and survived conditions that stressed other species severely. The fruit met or exceeded quality expectations. Pest and disease observations confirmed near total immunity to problems plaguing commercial orchards. Official USDA publications recommended jujube cultivation based on documented research results. Then, the institutional support simply evaporated, despite uniformly positive research outcomes. USDA funding shifted away from jujube evaluation. Extension services stopped promoting the species. Nurseries that briefly offered jujube trees dropped them from catalogs. The promising introduction that arrived with government endorsement disappeared from agricultural awareness within a generation. The commercial fruit industry had no interest in a tree that eliminated dependency on their products and services. Jujube requires no pesticides, threatening agrochemical company revenue. The billions of dollars Americans spend annually on orchard pesticides depend on pest-susceptible species requiring constant intervention. A fruit tree that needs no spraying generates no chemical sales. Industry marketing budgets naturally promote species that require industry products, while ignoring species that do not. Jujube requires minimal irrigation, threatening water-dependent agricultural infrastructure. The vast irrigation systems that California agriculture depends upon require crops that demand constant water delivery. Drought-tolerant species that thrive on rainfall alone provide no justification for taxpayer-subsidized water projects. Agricultural water interests have no incentive to promote species that would reduce demand for their infrastructure. Jujube offers no proprietary varieties that concentrate market power in corporate hands. The fruit industry has consolidated around patented varieties that growers must license from corporate owners. Jujube's ancient cultivars remain in the public domain with no licensing fees or corporate control. A farmer can propagate jujube indefinitely from their own stock without permission or payment. This independence threatens business models built on grower dependency. Fresh jujube has limited shelf life that challenges conventional distribution systems. Ripe jujube fruit remains at peak quality for only 1 to 2 weeks before it transitions to the dried state. This time frame challenges distribution systems designed to warehouse fruit for months before retail sale. Industry prefers species that accommodate slow-moving supply chains over species that require direct farmer-to-consumer relationships. Dried jujube competes with established date and raisin industries that would prefer no competition. The California date industry and raisin grape industry occupy market positions that jujube would challenge directly. These established industries possess political influence, marketing budgets, and distribution relationships that new crops lack. Their preference is obviously to exclude competitors rather than welcome them. The jujube trees growing today in scattered American locations demonstrate what commercial agriculture deliberately suppressed. Mature trees at USDA research stations still produce abundant fruit from original Frank Meyer introductions, over a century old. These living specimens prove everything Meyer documented remains true. The trees survived neglect when research funding disappeared. They continue fruiting without the irrigation, pesticides, and intensive management that commercial orchards demand. They represent permanent food production requiring essentially no ongoing investment. Small-scale growers across the American Southwest have rediscovered jujube through internet communities that bypass agricultural industry information control. These growers report exactly what USDA researchers documented a century ago. The trees establish easily, produce quickly, survive drought and cold, resist all pests, and generate delicious fruit for decades without intervention. The information that agricultural institutions buried spreads horizontally between practitioners. Asian American communities have maintained jujube cultivation continuously since early immigration. Chinese and Vietnamese communities in California, Texas, and other states grow jujube in home gardens and small orchards that preserve cultural food traditions. These communities never forgot the fruit that feeds 400 million people annually in their ancestral homelands. They simply grow what they know works regardless of mainstream American agricultural fashion. Commercial jujube production is finally expanding as water scarcity forces reconsideration of irrigation-dependent orchards. California growers facing groundwater depletion and restricted water allocations are discovering that jujube produces profitable fruit from rainfall alone. The tree's advantages become impossible to ignore when the water that sustains conventional orchards is no longer available at any price. The jujube tree waiting to be planted on your property right now represents permanent food security that commercial agriculture has systematically ensured you would never discover or consider. A single mature tree produces 50 to 100 pounds of nutrient-dense fruit annually for a century or significantly longer without irrigation, pesticides, or significant care of any kind. You would harvest fruit sweeter than expensive imported dates that stores for many months when naturally dried. You would grow abundant food that requires absolutely none of the inputs that fill agricultural supplier profit margins, year after year. You would establish productive capacity that outlives mortgages, careers, economic downturns, and multiple generations of your family. The commercial fruit industry generates well over $20 billion annually in the United States alone. That enormous revenue stream depends on farmers continuously purchasing seeds, seedlings, chemicals, equipment, irrigation systems, and water rights from industry suppliers season after season without interruption. A fruit tree that completely eliminates these dependencies threatens revenue streams across the entire agricultural supply chain, from chemical manufacturers to equipment dealers to water brokers. Industry has absolutely no incentive to promote your independence from their products and services. Every apple, peach, cherry, or imported date you purchase from conventional sources represents fruit that a single jujube tree would have provided essentially free for 100 years or more. Every dollar spent on irrigated fruit represents water that drought-proof jujube would not have required at any price. Every pesticide-covered fruit represents toxic chemicals that jujube never needs under any circumstances. Every agricultural input purchase represents dependency that jujube permanently eliminates. 400 million Chinese people harvest this beloved fruit every autumn in joyful celebrations that date back over 4,000 years of continuous tradition. The legendary USDA plant explorer Frank Meyer brought the finest selected varieties to America in 1908, with official government endorsement and enthusiastic recommendation. Government researchers at multiple stations confirmed every claimed advantage through years of carefully documented scientific study. The tree was absolutely perfect for American conditions, and American agriculture deliberately and systematically forgot it anyway. Sweeter than dates, survives desert heat and Arctic cold equally well, lives and produces abundantly for 100 years or longer. Zero pests, zero irrigation, zero care required. They forgot this tree deliberately because your permanent free fruit supply means the permanent end of their paid dependency business model. Now you know what 400 million people celebrate joyfully every single year. Now you understand exactly why you were deliberately never told. If this opens something important for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every single like and share spreads what commercial agriculture has deliberately forgotten to keep you permanently dependent on their irrigated, sprayed, and tightly controlled fruit supply forever. See you in the next one.